Parshas Korach, Tavshin Ayin Gimel. Now, basically, over the past couple of years, I try very hard when we go through the different Parshas, being that we're now in our 4th year, I try to speak about a different Inyan and try to do something that we haven't done in the past. But looking back over the Parshas Korach from the past few years, it seems that we've spoken about the Inyan of Machlokes just about every year. And the truth is, one can really never emphasize enough the importance and the lessons that need to be learned staying away from Machlokes. The Gemara Masechta Sanhedrin, Daf Kuf Yud Amud Aleph, says, Kol HaMachzik b'Machlokes, one who is Machzik b'Machlokes, Oiver b'Lav. A person is over a lav, shenemar v'loisiya kekoirach v'chadosai. A person should not be like Korach and the people that join Korach, and we count that as a lav. And a person who gets involved in a machlokes is over that lav. So, Be'emes, we have a bunch of questions we can ask. So we've asked some of these questions in years past, and some of them beg to be. As soon as you start learning this parsha, first of all, why do we use this parsha over here to teach us the lesson of machlokes? Why isn't there a tzivui? If machlokes is such a bad thing, why isn't there a tzivui in the Torah about machlokes? Also, we know that Korach was punished with a new punishment. It was a new bria. HaKadosh Baruch Hu created something new that never was before to punish Korach. Why did it have to be that way? Why did a new punishment, one that did not exist ever before, have to be created for machlokes? Could it actually be that no oynish was appropriate for machlokes? There are some very severe oynishims, and yet we had to create a new oynish to punish Korach for the inyan of machlokes. And the truth is also, if we say that you're over a lav, so we see now that machlokes is what? Machlokes is only a lav. So why was it so terrible? Why was it, we even have punishments for averos chamuros. The Torah lists punishments, oinshim, for averos chamuros, yet for machlokes, which we say now is only a lav, we couldn't find any punishment for that. We had to create something totally new for that. We also see that the young children, babies that were 1 day old, went down with Korach. Babies that were young children were punished. How do we understand that? How do we wrap our minds around that a child who's 1 day old, 1 week old, a year old, young children got punished with Korach and went down with him too? And we know the Torah also says that it was usher to have anything to do with you weren't allowed to even touch or have anything to do with their belongings. So side little children inside their belongings, everything went down with that. So we know, everybody knows that Bayis Rishon, why was Bayis Rishon destroyed? The first Beis HaMikdash was destroyed because of Klal Yisrael doing Averos Chamuros. They did some they transgressed some serious Averos, and therefore we know Bayis Rishon was destroyed. But Bayis Sheni was different. Bayis Sheni was Nechrav because of Sinas Chinam. Brought down the Gemara. We know that Bayis Sheni, the reason Bayis Sheni was destroyed, and it's safe to say it's also the reason we still don't have Bayis Shlishi, because we haven't done tshuva on that. Sinas Chinam is what caused the destruction of the second Beis HaMikdash. They had Torah, they had mitzvahs, they had chesed, they had everything, but they had Sinas Chinam. But isn't Sinas Chinam, we just said Sinas Chinam is only a lav. So they had everything, Torah, mitzvahs, chesed, they had everything, but because of Sinas Chinam, the second Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, and we still don't have a third Beis HaMikdash. Almost 2,000 years we're in Galus because of Sinas Chinam. So the Shlosh says a very interesting thing on this week's Parshas, brought down in the Nesivos Shalom, that the 250 people that were with Korach, Avad the Dr. Shlosh, that their mindset, they thought they're doing things l'shem shamayim. And they knew that what Moshe Rabbeinu was doing They knew that was from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. They didn't argue with that. But they felt, Zok Tishla, that Moshe Rabbeinu was mispalel, that everything should stay in his family. Yes, Moshe Rabbeinu was right, but Moshe Rabbeinu was mispalel that it should stay within his family. And they felt that because Moshe Rabbeinu was mispalel, HaKadosh Baruch Hu had to listen. And they said, we also want to be close to Hashem. They meant L'Shem Shamayim. So why were they punished so severely for Ekdishla? They taka meant L'Shem Shamayim. Maybe the cheshbon wasn't as it should be. I just want to say over, I heard somebody told me a vart this morning, and I said I have to stick it into the shiur somewhere. The vart from Rav Steinman, Zol Zayin Gezun, in Eretz Yisrael, in Bnei Brak. He said a very, very interesting thought. He said that we know that in the Midbar, the man defined whether a person was a Bal Aveira or a person who did mitzvahs. And basically it was defined when you walked out your front door in the morning where the man was. If the man was at your front doorstep, then you were in order. But if the man was far away and you had to go get it, it was a sign that you had something to rectify, that you had been over something. So Frek Rav Steinman, what's going on over here? It should have been so easy to see who's right, Moshe Rabbeinu or Korach. It had to be that when they walked out, Moshe Rabbeinu walked out his front door, the man was right there. Korach walked out, the man was probably 2 miles away. So they should have noticed. Zok Rav Steinman, an unbelievably powerful vart. He says that the people, the 250 people, they walked out their front door and they saw that the man was very far away. He said, but you know what? They didn't learn the lesson. What did they think to themselves? He said, they thought to themselves, you know why the man is so far away? Because we're not fighting hard enough. L'Shem Shamayim, we're not fighting enough. We're not doing enough. They found an excuse even for that. Every time they walked out and they saw that the man was further away, they said, yeah, it must be because we have to make more of a macha. We have to fight harder. We have to fight more. So even with your own eyes, you see how things are unraveling because of machlekes, you'll give it teretz. You'll say it's L'Shem Shamayim. And L'Shem Shamayim is a lot of times the worst teretz. So Nesivos Shalom answers over here. He said, so all these questions, he says the Torah is teaching us just how terrible machlekes is. Even if you somehow, you make a cheshbon, your people can always make the most unbelievable, convoluted cheshbonis that it's L'Shem Shamayim. But still, Zok Nesivos Shalom, v'yahavta l'reacha kamoicha is the koyach that brings Klal Yisrael together. And when Klal Yisrael is ba'achdus, then HaKadosh Baruch Hu is called Avinu, and we're called his banim. We're called the children of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And it's not that way when we're apart. We say in the davening, Barcheinu Avinu, Kulanu Ke'echad. Zok Nesivos Shalom, when we are Kulanu Ke'echad, then we're Barcheinu Avinu, then we can have the brachas, Bi'ar Panecha. Only when we're Kulanu Ke'echad. And unfortunately, Zok Nesivos Shalom, it works the other way too. The targum of machloikis is plukta. And plukta means period. Period means that amongst Klal Yisrael, this period, when there's period amongst Klal Yisrael, then there's period between HaKadosh Baruch Hu and Klal Yisrael. And that's what Chazal teach us when they tell us that the Bayis Sheni was nechrav because of sinas chinam. Yes, the Nesivos Shalom, he says that it's teaching us a lesson. That it's just as severe as all the other Averos Chamuros put together. You ask Akasha, how's it possible? It is possible. And it's a fact that Machloikis and Sinas Chinam is just as severe as all the Averos that caused the destruction of the first Beis HaMikdash. Why? Because it causes separation between HaKadosh Baruch Hu and Klal Yisrael. And that, when there's a separation between Hashem and Klal Yisrael, that brings a churban. And that's why also the einish for machlokes is more severe than anything else. Because it causes a separation between HaKadosh Baruch Hu and Klal Yisrael. And that's why Korach was punished so severely. Even though it was only, let's say it was only a lav. But what HaKadosh Baruch Hu dislikes most is machlokes. The world can only exist with shalom. We say the Rocher Darchei Noyam, V'chol Nesivos Shalom. We end the tefillah, every tefillah that we daven is ended with shalom. Birchas Kaihanim ends with shalom. And the absence of shalom causes what? It causes Churban Abayis. Even if you think you're l'shem shamayim, the pagam of machlokes is very, very terrible. And the geula can and will only come, Zakta Nesivos Shalom, through v'ahavta l'reacha kamoicha. V'ahavta l'reacha kamoicha also brings you to v'ahavta es Hashem alekecha, and that's the only way we could have a geula. Machlokes is so terrible that even the children and their belongings went down. And we had a shaila, how is it possible that such young children, why are children responsible? And Nesivos Shalom says a very interesting thing. He says that when the children went down, it wasn't begeder and einish. Because a child is not a bar einshin. A child is not subject to punishment, to einshim. He says machlokes, and we've mentioned this in past years, and I see some people smiling because they remember, but it needs to be said again. Machlokes is like a contagious illness. If you're there and you walk into the room, even if you didn't do anything, you have to stay away from machlokes like it's an illness. Like when you walk into a room, a hospital room, when Chas v'Shalom somebody's sick and you need to put on a mask, you need to have all sorts of things, barriers and all of that. A person should never be around. When you are around machlokes, so the fact that the children went down, it wasn't because they necessarily did anything wrong. It's a metzias that you need to stay away from machlokes. They were afflicted with this contagious illness. The Chofetz Chaim says that a Baal machlokes, a person who's someone who is a Baal machlokes, it's brought down that it's one of the 4 people who are called Rishoyim. It says, Arba Nikron Rasha, 4 different types of people are called Rasha, and one of them is a Baal machlokes. The Chofetz Chaim says something very interesting. He says it doesn't mean that you're called a Rasha only over here, because a lot of people we know, a person could be a Baal machlokes, he walks around, and a lot of people love it. They feel it's great, it's entertaining, it creates news, it creates a little buzz. Well, how bad could a machlokes be? So not everybody will call you a Rasha here. He says a person is called a Rasha because when you come, when you come up there, so then it's going to be publicized for everybody. You're going to be up there, and they're going to call you a Rasha. And everybody's going to know you're a Rasha. And that's how terrible, that's what it means. When machlokes is one of the people who are called a Rasha is machlokes, it means also in Olam Haba. You're going to have a shame Rasha up there. It might be funny over here. You might want to join a machlokes here. But when you get there, it's not going to be funny. You're going to be called a Rasha. So we look around today. It maybe sounds a little bit controversial, but I think it's Pashut Raid what I'm saying. You look around today, and we're living in a world where there's so much Torah, and so much chesed, and so much Abbas chesed. Everybody loves to do chesed. There's Torah. And there's so many, the people are doing so many mitzvahs. And there's so much good going on. But yet, almost 2,000 years later, we're still in Gullus. And one of the very big reasons, and one of the reasons it's safe to say, is because we haven't rectified what we messed up almost 2,000 years ago. And as long as we're sitting here in Gullus, and there are families that are broken apart because of silliness, because of stupidity, that they won't talk to each other for years, and you have yeshivas where people don't talk to each other, and we have institutionalized machlokes where unfortunately it's become accepted in Klal Yisrael that leaders of Klal Yisrael will not talk to each other for one reason or another, then we're barking up the wrong tree. We're not getting there. We're not accomplishing what we need to do. Let's take this lesson that we talk about every year, and I'm talking to myself also. Sometimes we become immune to things. Somebody mentioned to me also, he says, well, if you go down the street in Eretz Yisrael and you see somebody screaming in Eretz Yisrael, he screams at a car, he screams Shabbos. The guy doesn't care, he doesn't hear you. His stereo is on in the car a lot louder than you could scream Shabbos, and he goes by. What are you screaming Shabbos for? I heard from a very chashuv Rebbe, he said the reason you're screaming Shabbos is for yourself. Is that you should never become immune, you should never become complacent that you see another year driving on Shabbos. So you should scream Shabbos even if he doesn't hear you. Every year, Parshas Korach, we need to bring up this idea of machlokes for ourselves, that we should know that what we have to fix up in order, Mir Tashem, to bring Mashiach.